Hi everyone, thank you for joining us. If you get a chance, it'd be nice to know where you are, where you're from. Please type it in the chat. Nice to know whereabouts you're joining us from. As usual, we always want to know who's here. So you should be able to find the chat button at the bottom of the screen. I'd love to know where you're dialing in from. I am connecting from cloudy Newbury in Berkshire, which is was a bit miserable. And
it's quite bright down here in South London, actually. It's been a nice day, David. Sorry to show off, but it's nice.
I tell you, must have brought the sun back with you from Vietnam.
Well, I don't know about that.
A little pocketful, just snuggled it past.
That's all we could fit in.
Customs.
Was it cloudy in Vietnam, Myles?
We had interesting. I'll just talk about my holiday. This is very risky at the top of the session. But we had a wide range of weather. Very hot, very sunny, humid. We had heavy rain. We had a typhoon.
Wow.
There was we had lots of weather, I would say.
Just every weather.
Yeah, exactly.
All the weather.
All weather. All the above.
Did you
sound like being in the UK?
Yeah, well, yes, it was. Although it's definitely warmer. Definitely warmer.
Did you have the sweet coffee with the condensed milk?
Yeah, I'll talk to you about the coffee, John. That was possibly
No.
I'm a very boring old man when it comes to coffee. I don't go for these fancy newfangled coffees. So it was all a bit exotic for me. I like a bit of espresso, and that was harder to find. Anyway, there's risk is me talking about my holiday. I think we should change the subject.
I'm still very interested in the holiday conversation, but for everybody else, we'd love to know where you are in the world, where you're from. Cortado. I like the idea. I do like a cortado. There we go. And hello from the Cotswolds, Jack. Hi, John. I do cortado. Now you got me thinking. All I've got is a green tea in front of me. Hello, John. Mr. Ambrose, good to see you on the call as well.
Pennsylvania.
Thank you. Yeah, that's an interesting swing state. So
indeed,
they
say. It's all happening there, isn't it?
It's all down on you, John. It's all on you, John.
Yeah, no pressure.
No pressure. Shouldn't you be out campaigning? But thanks everybody for joining us wherever you are in the world. West London, Shropshire. Oh, I love the idea of being in Shropshire. Media City. I love the idea of Media City as well. I haven't been there for a long time. Oh, well. Know where you're from? Towchester. I need to think about whereabouts in the world that is.
I think it's Toaster, David, isn't it?
Toaster. Well, there we go.
I think so.
Don't let me loose.
Toaster, yeah. That's one that I do know.
I also know how to Loughborough next.
Have a go at Omaha.
Edinburgh.
That's easier.
Yeah, it's true. South Africa, I like that. That's easy enough for me to pronounce. But you probably could catch us out with a local place. But yeah, thanks for joining us. I guess we'll just wait a few more seconds while others join us. The numbers are slowly creeping up. But as usual, we'll be using the chat as we go through, and we're doing things slightly differently this time in terms of this session. We've got a little bit of content and then opening up for questions as we go through. So you get a chance to ask your questions as you go through rather than just saving them to the end, which is a little bit different. So yeah, just it's good for you to let us know where you are in the world, because that almost just proves that you're able to type in and ask your questions.
I think we'll probably leave a bit of time for questions at the end. Asking them as we split it up into sections is probably a good thing as well, because there's going to be less preamble about how the 9-grid's set up, which is what we normally do on those. Although it would be good to give a little bit of context about realities. But with that, I think I will start my script, and then I'll hand over to you, David, after I've first bit.
Oops. I've got to get to the right bit for you. There we go.
Perfect. Okay. Hi, everybody. Welcome to this Ask the Analyst session for Digital Learning Realities 2024 in association with Learning Technologies, taking place in April 2025 at London's Excel. I'm John Kennard, Content Editor at Fosway Group, Europe's #1 HR industry analyst, and I will be your host for today's session. Founded in 1996, Fosway Group provides in-depth corporate research on next-gen HR talent and learning practices. We provide analyst and advisory services to more than 3,000 European and international headquartered multinationals and corporates, as well as independent vendor research and EMEA market commentary. Now, before we launch into the body of the session, let me also take this moment to tell you about Fosway Corporate Membership. Next slide, please. One of our newest services, the FCM is an invite-only network for HR learning and talent leaders, offering privileged access to the data and insights that sit behind our core research, which is 9grid, and today talking about realities. There's also automatic booking privileges for our roundtable program and the opportunity to book exclusive time with a member of our analyst team as well. There's plenty more besides this, so do get in touch if you're interested in learning more. Now, covering L&D priorities and strategy, budgets and investment trends, AI and L&D, the modern learning experience and the new learning tech landscape. This is the 10th year of the research, which has allowed Fosway Group to build up an unmatched picture of digital learning landscape. So I'm delighted to introduce two analysts deeply familiar with this research and its implications. David Perring, Chief Insights Officer here at Fosway Group, as well as Senior Analyst in Digital Learning, Myles Runham, to dissect and discuss all the findings in this latest iteration of digital learning realities. Okay, David Perring, it's time to set the scene.
Okay, so we've been running this survey for about 10 years. There's thankfully different questions that we ask as we go through, but we've also got a core range of questions that we've also created, so we get a bit of a longitudinal view. Sometimes they go back to about 2013, 2014 when we kick things off, but also there's ones that run pre-COVID, post-COVID, that sort of give us some nice, interesting sense of the trends. And what we've been doing is sort of having some core sense of L&D priorities and strategy, a core sense around budgets and investment, and then started to create some nuance and focus on different sections. And this year's section that we added in was around AI and L&D, what it was doing today and where people see it going tomorrow. And finally, we've sort of picked up these other themes. Again, these have been pretty consistent around the modern learning experience and the new tech learning landscape. So almost that ecosystem view of the solution. And we ask a horrendous number of questions, and we get about 400 organizations who start the program, don't necessarily get to the end, but we get amazing feedback from some amazing organizations, large international corporates. Typically, most of the respondents are in organizations bigger than 1,000 organizations, at least half are over 5,000. So we've got a really interesting enterprise view. And what we've tried to do is distill those into the infographics, which we've made freely available pretty much since the start of September, and we pretty much launched the last one in October. Just going through each one of these themes and providing with a little bit of insight around what's been happening in these areas. And what we're going to go through today is just pick out a couple of items, discuss them a little bit with Myles and myself. And if you've got any questions around what you see and want to contribute your thoughts as well, please put those in the chat and we'll go through those and try to do our best to put some broader context around what we're seeing. And yeah, we're going to wrap this up in an hour's time. We provide you with a link to the download as well, so you can watch it back if you're so inclined or want to share it with friends and colleagues. But the first item, and we've been asking this question for a very long time, what are your top priorities for your L&D strategy for the year ahead? And this year was something which was incredibly unique, which has never happened before, which was compliance and regulatory training didn't come first. It has been boringly predictable what was been at the top of priorities for L&D teams, and that has always been regulatory and compliance training. It's been by far and ahead above everything else for over about 10 years. This year was different. We saw upskilling and reskilling become the top item in terms of learning priorities for the year ahead. It is for the first time ever that's happened. Historically, maybe that would have wallowed in third, fourth, fifth place. And that shows a really seismic change in where L&D are in their thinking and also the pressures that are being placed on them by organizations. It is huge. And I almost fell off my chair when I saw that and we started doing the analysis, to be honest. But that's a really significant change. And I think it raises some interesting questions around how well are L&D prepared for delivering that changing pace or that changing focus, because regulatory training is very different from upskilling and reskilling. And linked to that, going on. We also asked in a different question, how effective is your learning strategy at delivering the following? And we picked out a few different areas. And what I zoomed in on here was that area, which was the top priority, upskilling and reskilling. And you could beat me up and say, well, actually, there's not really a very balanced sense of feedback here. But I'm always of the opinion that we should be really good at the things that matter. And in this instance, the things that really matter around upskilling and reskilling, overall, we're not really good at. We're not very effective. Only 13% say they're truly effective at developing people's skills. And that's a huge challenge for organizations. Now, if it was a normal distribution, you'd probably end up with something which was a little bit more 15%, 15%, and 66% in the middle saying we're quite effective. But this shows that maybe we're more ineffective than we are at being very effective, which is a concern when this is a big priority. And that's my sort of first thing, I suppose it's skills, and we're not necessarily great at doing that as an L&D function. And that leaves us maybe with some serious problems as we think about that going forward. Now, if you've got any questions about the priorities and strategy, please throw them in. But I know, John, you had some burning questions from other sources, if people aren't wanting to check them up or give us some initial questions straight off the bat.
Well, I mean, first off, looking at this stat here on the screen, only 13% of L&D teams believe their learning strategy is very effective.
Yeah.
This seems like a bit of an indictment. Myles, what's your reflections on this?
Yeah, I think that's a fair challenge, John. I guess, I mean, as David was saying, so it's kind of an unprecedented leading position for skilling and upskilling in this data set for 10 plus years. So I think one of the things that it reflects elsewhere in the study as well, which we'll send round to everybody here, the infographics, you can see that there's much more confidence and sort of confidence in capability in terms of compliance and content, because that's been top of the pops for a decade or more. So you get the sense that learning and development functions and the businesses that support them are much more confident about how to design and deliver learning and training for compliance than they are about to design and deliver learning and training for sort of skills development. And so I think there's a sort of, we've seen the initial change in the top priority, but perhaps it's a leading indicator of then the tools and tactics, techniques, and design approaches that are required to be as effective at upskilling and reskilling. There's more required. That's it's a longer term focus often. It's a much more personal requirement for learners. So there's some quite interesting challenges to be as effective. So I think there's sort of partly a lag effect here, but also some different design requirements needed.
I mean, so what are the changes that you're seeing in learning design from the research you've been doing?
So I think, well, as it's related to this kind of the requirements for upskilling and reskilling, I think that one of the most important challenges is the personal touch, so genuine personalization, so the ability to level set current skills capability, the ability then to understand what the individual development requirements are, to set that pathway clearly for people, and then to help guide and offer feedback as people have the opportunity to practice and rehearse skills. So I think there's a number of factors that are quite different in the requirements for the skills agenda that perhaps are not the case for the sort of more, I guess, the more broadcast approach for compliance learning. So I think that's probably some of the most important factors. I think with upskilling and reskilling, for me, the ability to practice, rehearse, and get feedback on the skills that are required and you're required to develop and you want to develop is probably the most important changes. Some of that's to do with technology, some of it's to do with data, and some of it's to do with design. But I think that, for me, that's the core change, and that's going to take some time, I guess, to sort of catch up to that level of confidence.
David, anything to add?
I'm just curious. I think when I think back to my time when I was working in corporates and back in the day, too long ago, I had a job title which was head of blended learning, and blended learning was bloody difficult to do. it was difficult to try and organize. The systems weren't really geared up to deliver it, trying to make sure you had the right blend and the right prerequisites sometimes for courses, making sure people followed up, that they had support in the right place was really tough. It was hard to design. I'm just having maybe been a bit detached because we've been doing some more stuff around talent, people success. Myles, are you seeing that sense of blended learning getting any easier? I know actually for the audience, I'm just curious, are they seeing blended learning actually getting easier to deploy and deliver? Or is it as hard as it's always been?
I guess I think it is. It's difficult. I suppose it's really difficult to do very well. I think it's probably the challenge, and I think sort of what's included in the blend is probably the most important factor. And I think it had traditionally tended to include some form of live instruction alongside content. So there was the blend was really a blend of two ingredients. Whereas I think now the blends are becoming much more sophisticated, with more practice and rehearsal, as we've talked about, but also the ability to discuss with peers for some synchronous learning, live events, plus kind of long-term coaching, feedback, etc., included in more sophisticated blends as well. So I think what blend means has become more complex, which then becomes more complex to manage. Having said that, I think some of the better tools and systems are quite sophisticated at helping to manage that as well. So I think it is getting hard. It's still hard. It's not getting easier, but I think the capabilities to support it are getting better.
Very true. And I love what Viv has said in the chat, saying, if anything, blend is more complex, more nodes to choose from, takes very good design to work well. And I think it picks up on your point. And also what Fiona's highlighted around with Paul saying, compliance and regulatory training is not going away. I know we had that conversation. I remember going back to the day when regulatory compliance training was a little bit of a home run for anybody involved in e-learning because it drove up the numbers. It showed high adoption, easy business case. Don't get rid of my team. We do all the regulatory compliance training and give you a little bit of an immunity, but there's maybe more to do around that. So again, I don't know if you've got any other reflections yourself, Myles, on this sense of digital learning priorities,
No,
especially around skills, maybe.
I think it's really important the skills has reached the top spot, but I think it's also really important to that sort of the burden of compliance is still strong and it's enduring and it counts for a lot. So I think this isn't like a whole sea change overnight. It's just that it's a sort of a long-term shift in priorities, and I think that shift will continue. And I don't think L&D is really leading that shift as well. I think largely L&D is responding to talent requirements and strategies and needs of organizations, which will endure. So I think it's probably we'll see how these things will unfold over the next couple of years, probably as this trend develops.
But it's interesting, isn't it? I'm just thinking on the fly now. When I was doing again back in the day, too long ago, thinking about the learning strategy, we always used to focus on new systems, new starters, new products, new processes, and compliance would also be one of those, plus people's change in the organization's performance gaps, but also promotions into leadership. And those are almost like predictable drivers of training. But I think back to the day and it was maybe more knowledge focused rather than skills focused. And maybe there is something especially in what you're saying around that practice and rehearsal, which is something that is a new boundary for us all to embrace a little bit more. Around those areas. Compliance isn't going away, but super interesting. I'm trying to catch up with what John was saying about underneath. I'll try and read that as we move on to the next bit. So again, if you've got any questions, put them in. Super interested in people's feedback. Thank you, Stuart. Thank you, John, for adding your comments too. And I'll try and read those when I get we get Myles to speak again. But in the meantime, what I'm going to do is quickly go through and let's move on. Where are we? So we also always ask about budgets and investment trends, and there's some really interesting things that have come out in this year's survey as well. I think it's probably not unusual for people to get a sense that actually there is maybe greater economic uncertainty. We went through all the COVID bits. There was a little bit of a bounce back, and now there's uncertainty because of global conflict, innovation, challenges around sustainability and things like that. But overall, those economic headwinds have sort of bitten into the sort of digital learning projects and people's priorities around that. When we've asked people in previous years around their investment intentions, they've been typically on balance still more positive than negative. And again, this last year was a little bit of a buck against that trend. And this year has seen maybe a bit of a softening from last year, but there's still this overall sense of the tipping point being more to actually we're delaying investment, we're sort of stopping investment, sort of being the balancing side, and no change being the sort of status quo, and for only 14% saying, yeah, we're trying to accelerate, we're trying to embrace more innovation in a way that maybe during COVID, because digital learning or learning technology was the only game in town, there was a massive acceleration with that, which did feed over in subsequent years a little bit. But now things seem to be under the spotlight a little bit more. We get this sense that actually L&D budgets are under the spotlight to prove value more than they've ever been. And again, I'm curious about what other people's experiences besides our sort of local view through the survey that we've done. But when we've asked people again in this year about not only about what their budget is, but where they're looking to spend it and how they're looking to resource L&D projects for 2024, 25, and looking out a little bit maybe beyond then, there's a sense of shifting to subject matter experts as being one of the drivers. That's where the effort seems to be being focused in the chart. And the other one is this AI to support content creation. And it's really, really difficult not to see those two things as being linked. Actually, the AI to support content creation isn't just about our L&D team creating content faster. It's also about enabling people who aren't in the team, maybe to democratize development in a way. And it sort of takes me back to years gone by of user-generated content and thinking about that as a way of proliferating demand. But that is a really significant change in a way that actually hiring full-time employees, more people are saying no than saying yes. Outsourcing projects to external providers on a knife edge, probably a bit like Pennsylvania at the moment. Using contractor external marketplaces. No, we're not so keen on that, but using internal resources, subject matter experts, redeploying people from our existing L&D team. I think it's difficult not to see these things as being linked. It's almost I think we have this sort of adage of doing more with less or the same. And I think that's something that comes through strongly, both in the reluctance maybe to invest in learning tech, which has been a boom place for the last 25 years probably, and being a little bit more reticent. Not to say there isn't growth, but just to be a bit more reticent. And again, that's something to think about. So again, this sense of automated authoring is probably a question for everybody on the call, the people that are here. Is that a good answer? Is that something that's the good thing that we should be doing? Should we be looking for more democratization, more content? Is that a problem? Again, be interested to hear everybody's views in the chat.
I think it's interesting, David, as well that you see that there's. I think these things are connected, and I guess in our corporate research network and a lot of the roundtable conversations have been focused on this. There is an opportunity to use these AI tools, which in terms of content are very, very powerful. As an efficiency saving opportunity, and I think that's come at the time when the economy is tough. A lot of businesses aren't growing as quickly as they'd like to be. Their profits are squeezed, so these efficiency opportunities are coming at the same time as economic hardship or leaner times. And I think that's putting additional pressure on save, using them as to simply to sort of to save some of those investments. If the economics were a bit more rosy, perhaps it would be different and people would be experimenting more. But I think there's a lot of pressure on teams to do that because the savings are significant as well. You can see savings of time and effort up to over 50 to 80% even. So wow. It's dramatic. And I think that so the timing is important as well. So I was just catch up with some of these.
I was just thinking questions about what Stuart was saying about that hallucination having different impacts on content creation, image generation, video. AI is good to work with, however, it does need to get better. And it just made me think of conversations that I know that you've had around the role of AI almost in the development process. and where specific areas where it can condense some of the process. I'm not sure if it's
Yeah,
worth reflecting on that.
I think few vendors, if any, I don't think any are and internal functions as well are sort of letting these tools run on their own. There is always this, now very well used phrase, human in the loop. So there's often, some kind of editorial check at the end of, or and then refinement. So I think a lot of the usage at the moment is for the heavy lifting of, sort of automated scripting, image creation, etc., which is then edited. It's not that these tools are being used just to create the final product, but there is a still so there's the focus tends to be on automation in the production process, less so in the design decision making, although there is
Right.
opportunity to use it in design, to use these tools in
Yeah,
design
yeah.
decision making as well. I think
It's
that's
interesting.
it's useful caution, but it's
Yeah.
still, I don't think even in using it in those instances doesn't necessarily reduce that cost saving opportunity, which is where most of that effect is being seen.
It's interesting. It's just, I guess, if you've got your own private LLM and you're not worried about your IP drifting out, then be able to ask the AI, could you recommend content structure, and without even necessarily going to the bones of it, maybe that ability to process multiple documents in a fraction of the time rather than me having to read it myself gives me an acceleration point. I still got to go and read it
Yeah.
properly at some point, but if it gets me to a structure that I can agree with my stakeholders faster, then maybe
Yeah.
that's a week saved, right? And again, that's a huge impact.
Yeah, I think so. I'm
Michelle,
going to sorry, so I'm going to make
that's
a
it.
call out to Stuart.
Yes.
Stuart, you're putting some really good points and questions in, but you've got your chat set to hosts and panelists only.
Ah,
So if you could go to the bottom and set it to everyone, then others will see it as well. So Stuart's asked if you find the L&D community are using prompting AI correctly. We find this is key to empower L&D professionals in the new age. So I think the extent to which AI, generative AI tools, and prompt creation is being used
engineering.
well. Yeah,
Yeah.
I guess my sense, Stuart, is that it's being used as well as any tools. So some people are using it very, very thoughtfully and carefully, and with a great sort of intelligence and creation. Others are being, perhaps less careful and thoughtful. So I think, as with any sort of adoption of new tools, there's quite a range there. So I think we've all still got a lot to learn about managing hallucinations, but also about appropriate application of these tools as well. Sorry, David, you were going to say something.
That's cool. And good spot, and keep them being anonymous, Stuart, if you want them to be anonymous. Maybe
Yes,
not
that's
to.
true. Sorry if I called you out inappropriately, Stuart. I apologize.
Not at all. I'm sure not. But equally, Michelle has asked it. So, did the data say anything about content creation versus content development? Is there a shift from one to the other? What are your thoughts about how I will accelerate this? To be honest, Michelle, we just ask the question and then see what people come back with to give us some quantitative answers. What we haven't done so far is probably dig enough in this survey round into some of the qualitative reflections of some of our respondents, and I'd love to do that more. So I don't to your is the answer to your question about content curation versus content development. Based on some of the answers in other parts of the survey, and I think we'll come to that, you'll probably get a sense of some of the maturity across the life cycle of a project, of a learning project. And I think that may answer some of the sense of content creation versus development. I think there's almost a sense of everything is fair game to some extent, and the AI is probably going to pick up anything it can get its hands on, and it's just a matter for us to filter out whether it's useful or truly transformative. But that probably means we need to experiment a little bit more.
So Viv's asked a usefully, thank you, Viv,
Yeah.
provocative question about the benefit. I suppose the for generative AI, the disruption being the tool set, that the technology that we use. So what's the value of search and discovery of content in an LXP versus using, a productivity tool that's got ChatGPT or other tool empowering it to give a good, or what seems like a good, useful, personalized answer in this, say, in Viv's estimates of less than a tenth of the time. So I think it's a really important question. I think where is the natural choice of users to find and manage information, it's probably not going to be in the learning system. It's going to be in, you know, in the productivity tool set. And I think that there's a significant change there. And I guess, you know, perhaps that's more about where you host the content than it is about you know, what you create. But I think it's a really good point, Viv. And I think there's a real, you know, a real challenge there to the kind of the status quo, because of those tools and the extent to which organizations are investing in making those tools available to a lot of employees, particularly in the knowledge-based industries as well.
And I love that, Viv, because I think there's something about going back for a few years. We used to talk about digital transformation. I think that phrase almost seems to have gone a little bit out of vogue. But the impact of transformation is around the nature of the experience. It's around the nature of the processes that people get exposed to, and the business models then that organizations are able to facilitate through that digital innovation. And I think what you've picked up on in your comment there is really, actually, you start from that 5 minutes hunting for LXP is part of the experience, right? The 15-minute generic module, maybe it can't be that anymore because you need to create a different experience through, and it has to respond to a different process because it's a different touch point in somebody's need. So I think that there's some really great things that we can use. And I know Myles has been working on some of these, a bit like Bob Mosher and his 5 moments of need. When we think about the technology through these almost long-standing models, I think we start to get to better answers. And I think what you're starting to pick up on there is that sort of sense of, actually, so what impact does AI have on our application of 5 moments of need, which Bob Mosher came to years ago, right? We've got a really interesting context because it's something maybe we weren't great at doing, because like we talked about blending earlier. So that's brilliant. Thank you. Should we move on to the next bit? I'm sorry, John. Do tell us to move on if we're starting to get a bit behind.
Well,
Go for it.
We just had that nudge under the table, David. So let's
I missed that chat. Shut up. Move him on. So almost, we hadn't planned this, but as we started to talk about AI, the details around what people are using AI for is all captured here. And thank you for Charles Jennings for calling this out back in September. When we pushed this out, he got access to early access and beat us to our own infographic in publishing this one, bless him. But really, I think what this shows in green is where people say that they are already using, right? Not advanced in their use, but just already using is the darker green. The lighter sort of sandy color is where people are piloting. The blue is where they're implementing, and the light blue is where they're considering. And I think that's just to sort of reflect, and the gray is not applicable, just like there's no area that people aren't interested or considering using AI in the future, from media generation through translations all the way down to performance support. But the people who are already using it, and this survey ran from about April through to August. So September was the last sort of submission days for us that I putting the infographics together. So there is a little bit of a lag. Maybe these sandy ones are now already using rather than just being a pilot. Maybe people have come to a hiatus and said, "Oh, right then, we like that. No, it's rubbish. We'll come back and look at it again in 6 months' time." I'm not sure what progress people have really made. But overall, when you look at this sort of green and sandy layer, most of this is well under 50%. Actually, most of this is well under 30%. And even a more significant proportion are things where you'd really, really hope that the learning experience was going to change around AI-enabled performance support. Isn't that an open goal? You're looking at about 10%. So there really is a huge, maybe overexcitement, and that does come out in some of the research that we've done around people's becoming increasingly a little bit jaded by the overhyping of what's available. But I don't want to steal your thunder, Myles, but I know you have a quote about overestimating and underestimating, and maybe that's something that is worth.
Well, it's not my it's not my quote. I think it's Roy Amaro or Bill Gates saying that we tend to overestimate the short-term impact and underestimate the long-term impact of technologies. And I think you know, we're sort of living through the impact of generative AI in those terms at the moment. I think it's all, but I think it sort of seems obvious to use AI for translations.
Yeah.
It kind of seems boring, but
Yeah,
it's kind of amazing that how accurate they are. I mean, they're not flawless, but they're pretty good already. And I think it's interesting to see that Reddit have decided that they're going to use AI to translate pretty much all of their
yeah,
Redditor content. So this transforms the economics of that social media platform as well. So it seems like an obvious and quite mundane application compared to a lot of other uses, but it's still, I think it's pretty significant and quite transformational, and it empowers a lot of people getting a much better quality learning experience than they've been able to in the past as well. So, I don't know, I'm ambivalent, I think.
yeah. No, but again, I know we've had conversations about this before, and that sense of actually, if AI enables you to do something that you weren't able to do before, I know this is something that you've been big around. It's almost that sense of, well, if you weren't going to do translations because you couldn't afford it, but now you can do 80%, 85% quality translations, why wouldn't you? If
Yeah.
that means it just gets a bit closer. And I think that's another thing. Think about that. User generated, if you weren't going to be able to do it, what is the next best answer? Not doing it at all, getting people to stamp up money they don't have in these tight times. And actually, it's the enablement. And I suppose it goes back to just good enough.
Yeah,
What was just good
exactly.
enough?
Exactly. I think that's I think that's exactly it. If it's good enough, then what's stopping you? I think we tend to sort of measure these sort of technological strides forward against an
Yeah,
unrealistic standard.
yeah,
If we were measuring it against the ability to sort of take design judgments of Steve Jobs, or say the musical brilliance of someone like the dearly departed Quincy Jones, then but they're unusual geniuses. So yeah, thank you, John. But for most of us, it's we're at work, we've got stuff to do.
yeah,
Good enough is the standard, and good enough has now become much cheaper and quicker. So we can't
and
sort of can't brush that aside, I don't think, or it's a risk too.
yeah. And in terms of what you've seen in the market, are there things in this list where you think, oh my God, why is that so low? There's much more opportunity around that, or
Well, I
are there
think
any things?
adaptive learning has been frustratingly low for ages. I think
Yeah,
so generative AI and AI in
yeah,
general sort of, obviously drives the ability for
mm,
adaptation at scale, but I think there's huge opportunity there. So I
yeah,
think it's that personalization. I think feedback at scale becomes really interesting, a little bit like what Viv was perhaps talking about, the opportunity to get some
yeah,
feedback. It might not be perfect human feedback again, but some sort of how did I do? I think those feel like really big opportunities. But they'll come. I think they're harder use cases to justify than content, which is
yeah.
much more familiar. So that gets the investment for now. But I think there's huge potential further down the list, definitely.
And John, just to to pick out the vagaries of our surveying language, which I take 100% blame for, we've left it intentionally open, and I'll say intentionally open as my get out clause around the media generation. We just meant anything that you wanted to generate, be that images, audio,
Text, yeah,
video, avatar. It was just, oh, what are you going to use it for? So we probably should have broke it down into more subunits, but I am always very guilty of the number of questions that we do ask with the number of options. So we were trying to be a bit more economical, believe it or not,
yeah.
which
It's
is
I suppose
it's
the shorthand is
not
that
true.
it's using AI to create the media assets that then go into learning
Yeah,
content.
yeah.
It's that part of the process, John, that we were trying to get at with that catch-all.
Thank you. So, so that's one side of it, and I've got to try and get back into the presentation. And the other side of it was just thinking about LMSs and LXPs. Again, this is a little bit of an unfair question. How well does your current LXP meet your expectations of AI? And we've set no expectation ourselves of what those expectations might be. But it was just quite interesting to ask that very broad question almost of say, well, are you happy with your systems? And for all the hype around AI and what you're seeing with ChatGPT and other systems, what do you think? And the vast majority, I'll round it up to 75%, said, no, it doesn't meet my expectations, whether it's LXP or LMS. A third say they meet their expectations, and I feel as though I should go back to every one of those and say, who is it? What are you using? So we can let the world know. And if it was in a room, we'd probably get you to connect and network with those people. So meeting expectations, but very few say they exceed their expectations. And I think that probably goes back to that sense of it is still early days. We can beat ourselves up by the rate of change, but actually there's still lots to be done. And I'm not sure if all of the ideas about how this is changing our touch points, how it's changing our learning experience, how it's changing our business model around learning, being more focused and personal, that hasn't necessarily filtered its way through from historically sort of maybe more training management orientated systems. But there we go. So John, I know there are other questions to ask.
There
Are there
are,
ones that
I
you wanted to chuck in?
There's a massive question from Marzi around AI and learning impact and value. More on AI projects later, perhaps.
Oh, yeah.
I think
Yeah.
in the interest of time, it could be good to move on to our fourth infographic, and I've
Okay.
made a note of questions we haven't asked yet, and try and do that at the end.
Yeah. Okay.
I think,
we'll
David,
move
just
on.
one thing
Yeah.
Fiona's mentioned in the chat is actually that there's, and this is from from her own research, that there's a lot of investment in roadmaps for all of the LMS and LXP providers in their AI capability. So we're expecting to see a lot of that unleashed over the next sort of 6 to 12 months, I guess. So it's a moving agenda.
So Fiona, we should have had you on here too. Bit of a crowded panel, but I think there's if there's any things that you recommend people check out in that DevLearn area, things that you think actually this is really interesting, do have a look, and maybe that's something to plug in there. Check that. Thank you. Let's move on to the next slide. So we also asked people about the evolving learning experience. And one of the pleasant surprises of this year's survey was the decline in people's sense of digital learning fatigue being a problem, or more of a problem, in terms of, I've done not another whatever expletive digital learning or e-learning course you're making me go through. And obviously there was probably something about the early 2020s, which maybe was a little bit of an over-reliance on digital learning. But that seems to have come down in terms of sort of less of a problem. Is increasing, more of a problem, no, not different from before the pandemic. Don't know, increasing number, maybe they weren't involved in digital learning then. But I'm not sure, Myles, from your point of view, I suppose my question for you is that because we've got better at doing digital learning, or is it we're just not doing overuse?
I think it's probably a little bit of both. I think it's generally the standards have risen. I suppose we've had some of this conversation as well about sort of more sophisticated tools, a better sense of time, sort of better at editing down the messages. I suppose a lot of investment in that dreadful phrase micro learning as well. So things get shorter naturally. And so I think that's part of the effect. And some of the returns, I suppose, there's shoots of returns to face to face as well. So I think it's partly it's a lot of factors here. I think for me the most important factor is it's really how does any learning intervention compete for attention in an increasingly noisy landscape? And I think that's our ongoing design challenge, is to make sure that we're as relevant as possible. And I think that's the real challenge, is about relevance rather than duration or screen time, I think.
And Stuart's come up with, do you think hyper-personalization is positively impacting digital learning fatigue?
I suppose I think, Stuart, it probably is. I think it'd probably be easy, having said that, to overstate that, because I don't think hyper-personalization is happening that frequently. So I think because it's not easy to achieve, but I think that's the opportunity, and I think really that's probably one of the major AI opportunities, is to really genuinely embrace that personalization capability. But I think it's at the risk of overstating how much of that's really going on at the moment. I think it's probably a bit more respectful design and respect for people's time is the factor at the moment.
I like to use the phrase humankind learning. There we go. That's just me. And then in terms of advances in innovating learning, actually those maybe learning teams are just incredibly modest, and they don't think that they're very advanced. And actually, I'm happy to be intermediate. But just this sense of how advanced is the use of technology to support the learning experience. And maybe this gives a nice springboard for what Stuart was saying. Good at learning portals, safe ground, pretty established. Actually, only a quarter say they're basic. Most are doing something intermediate, quarter doing something that's advanced. Few say they're not applicable. When it comes to learning campaigns, don't really campaign, don't really market, don't really think about engagement. It's something that is more basic, and those are advanced is a smaller number. Again, always think back to a great presentation for the guys at Novo Nordisk who are sending out very personalized emails based on people's progress and things like that to pull them in, to engage people at the right time in their time cycle. I even remember going back with John Ambrose when he was at Skillsoft, and they were looking at the cycle of people's learning and then pushing content to people at the times they're most likely to complete it. So it's really sort of tuning in to people's almost biorhythm around learning it. So that was a while ago. But this sense of nudging learners, workflow learning, only 8% think they're advanced. Only a third overall think they're doing something more than basic. Social collaborative learning, only a third doing something more than basic. And personalization, only 5% thinking they're doing something advanced. And that maybe could, if we put hyper in front of that, probably fits into what you were saying and answering Stuart's question, Myles. And then going down to learning chatbots, which is almost that changing touch point. Not many people doing anything around that. Not from a learning point of view, maybe it's just go to ChatGPT, get a suggested answer. Maybe it's right, maybe it's wrong. I've even come across a thing called, for those people who are followers of Marshall Goldsmith, the Marshall bot. You can ask the Marshall bot for free what you should do in managing particular situations or relationships, and he'll come back with some pretty interesting answers. So yeah, Marshall bot for free. But the wider use of learning chatbots doesn't seem to be that far out there at all. And maybe that's a point for, again, questions in terms of, is there things that you're seeing sort of evolve from your point of view, Myles, in terms of creating more exciting learning experiences?
I guess
Things that excite you?
I think some of them are the most exciting things, or some of them, something that I'm most encouraged by is the adoption of behavioral science and behavior change, actually, which is not really an innovation for technology. It's a design approach and methodology.
Yeah.
And I think, that's really alongside that, I suppose, the focus on, solving the most relevant problems for the organization and for individuals. I think those sort of shifts in design sensibility are the most encouraging and important. And then the technology choice becomes, what are the best tools of, and perhaps, including these techniques on this list. I think that for me is what I get most excited and encouraged by, choosing the tool to meet the need rather than being led by what the technology can do. And I think there's quite a lot of shift. And one of the things that is back to, I suppose, that sort of proof of investment that we were talking about at the top is that, needing to focus on the right problems that are most valued, invest in those, and also invest in them in a way that allows you to create the data that you can then use as evidence for impact or description of impact, I suppose. So I think that, that's what I get most heartened by, I think.
And John, is there anything you want to add, or do you want us to skip on to the next one? Our final section, I think it is, around learning tech landscape and things.
Just a good comment from John Ambrose. Love the concept of the Marshall bot. When do we get a pairing bot?
You don't want that.
This is the pairing bot, isn't it?
Yeah.
In beta, really.
It swears too much.
Yeah, let's move on to
at the moment.
Let's move on to the fifth one, and then we'll wrap up and take any other questions that we've skipped along the way.
Yeah, you pay for a pairing bot. Let's switch it off, maybe. Right, and so in terms of the new learning technology landscape, there's some really nice things in this infographic, and I think what we've managed to do is almost cross-correlate a few pieces of feedback from a few different questions, which we rarely get enough time to do. We're so busy pedaling fast that sometimes we don't get enough time to dig into the wonderful insight that you've given us. But one thing that came out from the survey around the learning technology landscapes, particularly around the sort of LMS, LXP versus the HR suite and the talent suite, was trying to get this sense of, do organizations that have best of breed solutions think they're better than those people who have or are using their HR suite to deliver learning? And what we did, we combined two questions. One is, what sort of solution are you using? And the other question that we correlated that to was, do you think the system that you have is fit for the modern workforce? And what we found was those organizations that were using best of breed learning platforms were over twice as likely to say that their solution, their approach is fit for the modern workforce than those who are using the learning module within the HR suite. And in some ways, that's a little bit of a wince for the cloud HR provider environment. I won't mention names, but also a huge win for the specialist intervention that even we're getting from today's LXPs and LMSs. They seem to be significantly better. Again, what I want to do is go back and see if I can find out who was using what solution, because it'd be interesting to say this provider has much more endorsement than this provider, but we're not able to get to that stage at this point in time. But that's, I think, a key takeaway for those people who are being shoehorned and into the consolidated nature of there is only one solution in it for HR, and that covers every HR process. There is a crumb of comfort. What's interesting, we're just doing the stuff around talent acquisition and ask the same combination of questions. In talent acquisition, you're 6 times more likely to say your best of breed solution is better than your cloud HR solution. So this is bad, but not as bad as other parts of the HR cycle. And the other question that we asked, just as on reflection, is this sense of, so LXPs, where do you see the future? Is it part of your LMS? Are you merging the LXP and LMS together? Do you have an LXP that you're phasing out? Have you decommissioned your LXP, or actually do you not see the need for one because the LMS or other solution is doing more of what you may have wanted an LXP to do in the site in overall? And what we found, sort of balancing out this sort of red and the green, is there's a little bit more negativity around the LXP as an option as part of the ecosystem, maybe than there's been in the past. And actually, the numbers of people who want one is significant, a third, but there's not over half. So there is a sense that maybe there is a risk of this part of the learning landscape becoming a little bit redundant. It's not overtly growing as much as the pushback against it. So on the sort of tipping point, it's a little bit on the edge. And I think that will only increase as we see more innovation from other parts of the employee life cycle. I'm thinking particularly things around employee mobility and career and manager performance conversations, the employee engagement, all who are starting to create routes or pathways into learning, because those elements of engagement, performance, career are triggers for learning. And that's almost disintermediating, sort of creating a barrier between those systems and learning, or offering a new touch point, should I say, to those to learning that maybe wasn't there before. So that sort of comes to the end of the section. I'll leave that up because, John, I'm not sure again if there were questions that it was useful to ask Myles around this sort of before we go on to other people's questions. I've lost the chat, so I can't see if people have asked more questions.
There's one thought, David, as you were sort of talking through the methodology and sort of asking, so the question about, are these systems fit for the modern workforce? And I guess, historically, these systems haven't been built for any workforce. They've been built for the organization, not for the workforce. So that the customer is who they're designed for. They're enterprise systems that are built for IT managers to manage in their organization. So they're not end user technologies or tools at all, or they certainly don't have that heritage and history. Hence the reason for the LXP arriving at all. So I think it's really important to remember that the customer and the user are quite different, and and I don't know, if you were to ask people the same question about their accounting systems, you'd probably get a much worse answer, because that again, the accounting system is bought for the organization, not for the employees. I think for me that's always at the heart of this problem, and allied to that is the fact that our user experiences are measured against our consumer experience, not against other systems. So so they don't really stand a chance against whatever's on one of these. And I think that for me that's the real challenge, and I just think because they're enterprise systems, they're always going to struggle. That's my 2 pence anyway.
No, I love that 2 pence. I think it's worth more than 2 pence personally.
Okay, £3.50.
Oh, 3 pence.
Yeah.
But it's interesting. I know we had a little bit of a conversation this morning, sort of as we chatted during the deep end after coming back from Vietnam on holiday, and I know it's getting a little bit. What time is your body clock on at the moment, Myles? Just to help us understand how you're.
It's getting close to gin and tonic time in my
Oh, okay.
mind. Yeah.
Okay. I'm surprised you haven't got a gin and tonic next to you, but
I
I know
didn't say
before
that.
we were talking about the L&D bubble and that sense of sort of, is there something about we need to think sort of maybe a little bit more about the human realities and the business realities? Are we still too divorced maybe in terms of our sense of systems and how they support learning rather than the management? Is that, am I just reiterating the same observation that you made?
Well, no, I suppose I don't think no. I think it's just maybe perhaps a sort of
Yeah.
different way of highlighting the same challenge, and I think that's hence that sort of earlier conversation about sort of that design sensibility and sort of that
Yeah.
whatever you call human-centered design thinking,
Yeah.
behavior change. Those focuses are on
Yeah.
understanding the relevance of an individual problem for people that's also shared by the organization. So it's where those problems overlap. And the focus on those, an organization is prepared to invest in that problem at the same time as an individual, understanding why that problem is a problem for them, and as a employee or as a colleague or whatever. And I think they're sort of the businesses that we work with that understand that best are the ones that get further ahead, and perhaps are the ones that are sort of choosing tools more that are more appropriate in this way as well. So
Yeah.
I think that
Cool.
shift in focus is really important, along with the shift in stakeholder relationships that allow you to be more influential in the business that way. So it's kind of perhaps a more mature approach.
Yeah. Love that. Love that. Right then. So, John, to bring you back into the room, the seconds are ticking down. Do we have time to answer Martin and Stuart's questions? Or
Sure.
it looks like Fiona's jumped straight in. Thank you, Fiona, for picking up the Stuart's conversation, and I'm sure you could hook up offline to dig deeper into that too. Thank you,
Fiona's
Fiona.
picked up Stuart's. Thank you, Fiona.
Fantastic.
But Martin, hello, sir. Has a question.
Yes.
What lessons can we learn from the last great leap forward in tech, which is e-learning? Look at that legacy. The reinforced learning as content and not performance. What are your comments on that, Myles?
Yeah, I get. I don't know. It's well put. It's a good provocative question, Martin, and well put. And I think that's the challenge, is that we've been in this situation for at least the sort of my 15+ years in learning, where it's tended to be, doing some learning has meant consuming some content, and making some learning has been making some content. So I think. I suppose breaking that deadlock is what's required, and I think we're starting to maybe see some of the challenge to that, because of the ability for individuals to sort of take control of their learning experiences and not have it all assigned and managed in that way. So whether that was a great leap forward, I think it was a great leap forward in efficiency, but I don't know if it was a great leap forward in sort of product experience, perhaps. But so I think it's more of that product-centered approach and understanding the relevant problems to solve. Is again, I suppose I'm repeating myself, is the answer.
I think that's spot on, right? And I think if we want to think about what the next leap forward is, and I think you've hit the nail on the head, Martin, it was about we reinforced scale rather than outcomes, and that's still the problem. But I think we still have a problem under thinking about, so how do we support learners? Going back to what Myles was saying, and I know we've been strong advocates for a long time about thinking about learning cycles, how we energize people through that, how we create more connectivity between people and people to energize them and reflect, so make it a more human process. And I suppose my reflection for you is that actually we need to look at the things that we need to get better in learning. And I think Stuart highlighted a little bit more earlier about hyper-personalization, but learning's a process, learning's a cycle. And I think that's where I hope we will see more innovation from providers and more demand from learning buyers to help learners move and change, because that's what it's all about. Ultimately, you've got to be able to cope with change. And we don't necessarily always do that very well. Knowing is not doing.
Yeah, I think we need to focus less on the technology and more on the problem solving, as you said, David. It's more about what people need to get done, help them do that, and apply the right tools, or the best available tools, perhaps.
And help people get
process.
more connected, help them be motivated. I always think that learning starts in the heart before it starts in the head. I look at my son, revising for his A-level revision for his mocks. His heart's not in it, so his head doesn't get involved. So I think we all suffer that. There's 101 things that we could rather than learning. but getting the space to think it's important and also then apply it. And change is really tough. Change is hard.
Good place to finish. Thanks everyone for their questions, to Viv, Fiona, Marzi, Stuart, Paul, John, everybody. We didn't get to answer quite all of them, but I'm just going to farm both of these analysts out and say that they'll be available on LinkedIn to answer all your questions and
Oh yes, reach
follow
out
up afterwards.
Yes.
Just a bit more information, if we could skip to the next slide.
I'm sorry.
On the
I've had a sleep at the wheel,
Okay.
John. Sorry about that.
Yeah, you so yeah, you can download the full 5 infographics from the URL beneath, or just search in our knowledge center for digital learning. Jack's put the link in the chat as well, actually. Of course, remember that the research is just the start. Join corporate membership for inside access to detailed research, benchmark reports, private roundtables, and a whole lot more. Fosway's accelerated buying support to align stakeholders, validate solution strategy, vendor options, the list goes on. But yes, we are also about to talk about a couple of new strategic projects for 2025, AI and HR talent and learning. We know that it affects all parts of the employee life cycle. It's growing exponentially as a factor for HR buyers. To become a core participant and gain access to the deeper research and insights beyond what's going to be put into the public domain, do get in touch, corporate@fosway.com. Any comments, David, on these projects? How much can we reveal about what's going on next year?
So as much as anything, I think one of the important things is this is about trying to create a healthy conversation with enterprise organizations around what they're doing, how they're approaching it. So it is a collaboration to understand the business case, the breakthrough moments, the trials, the tribulations, the best practice almost in evaluating and engaging the business, let alone the application. So it's about trying to pick up that sort of journey that enables you to go from how, why, where, when into, right, this is something that we can possibly get right and shape the future as well. So that's where we're trying to go with that.
Oh, I was on mute, classic. Okay, so just a couple more things. Do visit the Knowledge Centre, not just for digital learning realities, but all of our 9 grids, viewpoint papers, presentations. It pulls all this immense amount of research together, something we've launched quite recently, and it's a great hub for finding all the great Fosway Group content. Scan the QR code to take part in HR Realities. DR Realities is finished. TA Realities is being produced now, but HR Realities is still open. So is it, David?
Yeah, it's still, you've got a window of probably another week if you wanted to get involved or get your HR peers to get involved, but we'll be releasing the survey results in the new year, but collating them just for Christmas. So it'll be your late Christmas present in a way, or New Year's present, they call it that.
New Year's present.
Yes,
okay, that's it for today. Thank you for attending this webinar about digital learning realities in association, of course, with Learning Technologies happening at Excel next April. That's like I said, that's the end of today, but there will be more Ask the Analysts in the near future. Thank you, David and Myles, for your time, and thank you everyone for listening.
Thank you, John.
Thanks everybody.
And thank you, John and Ian, especially for bringing the Knowledge Centre together. It is an amazing resource, which has taken a huge amount of effort and respect to you guys.
Thank you. I'll speak to you all soon. Bye for now.
Okay. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks everyone.